The diesel engine growled through the midnight silence as I turned into Maple Creek Lane, headlights cutting through the darkness. 2:30 in the morning, another graveyard shift at the plant behind me, and all I wanted was my bed. But there they were, concrete blocks the size of refrigerators, stretched across my street like a wall. A fresh white sign bolted to the nearest block read, "Private property, no trespassing, Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association." The paint still smelled wet. I sat there in my truck, engine idling, staring at those blocks. 20 years I'd driven this route. 20 years coming home the same way my father did when he built this road back in '62. My fingers found the old Army dog tag hanging from my rearview mirror, his name etched in fading letters. You ever have one of those moments where the world just stops making sense? I climbed out, boots crunching on gravel. The blocks had to weigh 1,000 pounds each. Professional job. This wasn't some weekend project by angry neighbors. Someone had planned this, paid for it, executed it, while the rest of us slept. My phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. "Detour adds 40 minutes. Hope you budgeted for gas. Sweet dreams, William." The smell of fresh concrete mix hung in the cold air. These blocks were maybe 6 hours old. Whoever did this had been watching, waiting for me to leave for work. They knew my schedule better than I did. I walked the length of the barrier, 8 blocks total, positioned with military precision, no gaps, no way through except on foot. The message was crystal clear. Your truck doesn't belong here anymore. But here's the thing about messages. Sometimes the person sending them doesn't think through what happens when you decide not to listen. I drove the long way around, through downtown, past the closed shops and empty parking lots. 43 minutes instead of 3. $8 in gas instead of 50 cents. The math was simple and ugly. If this stuck, I'd be looking at $240 a month just to get home from work. My house sat dark at the end of Sunset Ridge Circle, exactly where it had been for 30 years. Same mailbox, same driveway, same property lines. Nothing had changed except someone decided I didn't have the right to reach it the way I always had. The dog tag swayed as I parked, catching streetlight through the windshield. Dad had surveyed half this county in his day, helped lay out roads that connected communities instead of dividing them. He'd roll over in his grave knowing someone was playing games with access routes. I should have gone inside, should have called it a night and dealt with this in the morning like a reasonable man. But when you're watching Karenology, you know there's no such thing as a simple misunderstanding. There's always something bigger underneath. The manila envelope was tucked under my front doormat, corner fluttering in the breeze. Official letterhead, fancy logo, all the trappings of authority. I read it under the porch light, feeling my blood pressure climb with every word. "Dear Mr. Cole," it began, "due to recent infrastructure improvements in the Sunset Ridge community, access to your residence via Maple Creek Lane has been temporarily restricted. To restore vehicular access, please remit the enclosed infrastructure improvement fee of $3,000 and sign the attached waiver of historical access rights." $3,000. To drive on a road my father helped build, to reach a house I'd owned since before half these people moved to town. But it was the signature at the bottom that made everything click into place. Victoria Kingsley, Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association President. The same Victoria Kingsley who'd been circling the neighborhood like a shark for months, talking about property values and community standards to anyone who'd listen. I folded the letter and looked back toward Maple Creek Lane, where those concrete blocks squatted in the darkness like tombstones for common sense. The detour route snaked through neighborhoods I barely knew, past houses where strangers slept peacefully, unaware that their neighbor had just declared war on a man whose only crime was wanting to come home the same way he always had. The porch light flickered as wind picked up, carrying the scent of approaching rain. Storm clouds gathered overhead, dark against darker sky. Thunder rolled somewhere in the distance, still miles away, but getting closer. And that's when I realized Victoria Kingsley had made her first mistake. She thought this was about money. Thunder cracked overhead as I knocked on the Kingsley front door at 7 a.m. sharp. The rain had started an hour before dawn, turning the world gray and cold. Perfect weather for the conversation I was about to have. Victoria Kingsley answered, wearing a cream-colored robe that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Blonde hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail, makeup already applied despite the early hour. She looked like she'd been expecting me. "William," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. I assume you received our correspondence. Your correspondence. I held up the soggy envelope. That what we're calling theft these days? She stepped aside, gesturing me into a living room that belonged in a furniture catalog. Everything white and beige and spotless. The kind of place where you're afraid to breathe too hard. Through the picture window, I could see my truck parked on the street, rain beating on the windshield. Coffee? She asked, moving toward an expensive-looking machine. I'll stand. Victoria poured herself a cup, steam rising like incense. William, I understand you're upset. Change is never easy, but the association voted unanimously to implement these improvements. What association? I never got a ballot. Non-members don't vote on member initiatives. She sipped her coffee, watching me over the rim. Though membership is available if you're interested in joining the community. The words hung in the air like smoke. Community. As if 20 years of living here, paying taxes, shoveling Mrs. Henderson's driveway every winter didn't count for anything. How much? I asked. I'm sorry? How much to join your little club? Victoria set down her cup with a delicate clink. Initial membership is $5,000. Annual dues are $1,200, plus the infrastructure improvement fee, of course. $8,000 to drive down a road I'd used for free my entire adult life. I felt something twist in my stomach, hot and sharp. That's highway robbery. That's community investment. Her voice stayed level, professional. Sunset Ridge is evolving, William. We're creating something special here. Property values have increased 18% since we implemented our first improvements. She moved to a filing cabinet, pulled out a thick folder. Look at these before and after photos. New streetlights, improved drainage, coordinated landscaping. We're not just neighbors anymore. We're a destination. The photos showed my street looking like something from a resort brochure. Manicured lawns, matching mailboxes, not a weed or weathered fence in sight. It looked beautiful and sterile and completely foreign. Where's my house in all this? I asked. Victoria's smile tightened at the edges. Your property presents certain aesthetic challenges, but we're confident that with the right guidance, you could bring it up to community standards. Through the window, I watched a jogger splash past my truck. Young guy in expensive running gear, earbuds in, completely oblivious to the drama unfolding in the Kingsley living room. He probably lived in one of the new developments on the other side of town, the kind with names like Whispering Pines and Meadowbrook Estates. What if I don't want guidance? Then you'll continue to have access challenges. Victoria's voice stayed pleasant, but something cold flickered behind her eyes. Infrastructure maintenance is expensive, William. We can't subsidize non-contributors indefinitely. She opened another file, spread papers across the glass coffee table. Legal documents, surveys, municipal codes, the kind of paperwork that takes lawyers to understand and regular people to dread. Of course, if financial constraints are an issue, we do offer payment plans. 18 months at 8% interest. Very reasonable terms. My father's dog tag pressed against my chest as I leaned forward to look at the papers. His name on one of them caught my eye. A survey from 1962, his signature in the corner. Property boundaries, right-of-way designations, access easements. These look familiar, I said. Your father did excellent work. Victoria's tone warmed slightly. Very thorough documentation, though some of these older surveys can be ambiguous. Modern technology allows for much more precision. She pulled out a newer document, crisp and official. This updated survey clarifies several boundary questions that have been outstanding for decades. I compared the two papers side by side. Same street, same lots, but the lines had shifted. Subtle changes, but significant ones. My driveway access that had been clearly marked as a right-of-way in Dad's survey was now labeled as shared community space, subject to association oversight. Have you ever watched someone steal from you in broad daylight while explaining why it's for your own good? This is interesting, I said, keeping my voice steady. Mind if I take copies? I'm afraid these are working documents, but your attorney can request official copies from the county clerk. Victoria began gathering the papers. Though, I should mention, legal challenges to properly filed association improvements can be costly. Rain drummed against the windows as she spoke. Outside, the jogger had disappeared around the corner, leaving only empty street and gray sky. The perfect metaphor for how isolated I was starting to feel. One more question, I said. Who exactly voted for these improvements? Victoria's smile never wavered. The board, of course. 5 members, unanimous decision, all properly documented and filed with the appropriate authorities. 5 people decided to block a public road. 5 property owners decided to improve their private community space. She stood, smoothing her robe. I'm sorry you're upset, William, but progress waits for no one. As I reached for the door handle, she called out behind me. Oh, and William, that payment plan offer expires Monday. After that, it's full amount only. The rain hit my face as I stepped outside, cold and sharp as her words. I looked back once as I reached my truck. Victoria Kingsley stood in her picture window, coffee cup in hand, watching me drive away on the long route home. But what she didn't know was that I'd already memorized every detail of those survey documents. And my father hadn't been just thorough. He'd been paranoid about documentation, which meant somewhere in his old files I had the originals. Dad's files lived in the basement, stacked in banker's boxes that hadn't been opened since his funeral 5 years ago. The musty smell of old paper and time hit me as I descended the creaking stairs, flashlight in hand. The overhead bulb had burned out months ago, and I'd never bothered replacing it. Box after box of his surveying work. Property maps, legal descriptions, correspondence with county officials. 40 years of keeping rural communities honest about where their land ended and their neighbors began. The man had been a walking boundary dispute resolution service. I found what I was looking for in the third box, a manila folder labeled Maple Creek Development 1962 in Dad's careful handwriting. Inside, photocopies of the original plat maps, correspondence with the County Planning Commission, and something that made my heart skip, a letter from the State Highway Department. The letter was brief and official. It confirmed that Maple Creek Lane was designated as a public right-of-way, maintained by county funds, with perpetual access guaranteed to all residents whose properties were served by the road, signed, sealed, and filed with the appropriate authorities in 1962. Public right-of-way, not private community space, not subject to association oversight, public. I spread the documents across Dad's old workbench, comparing them to my memory of what Victoria had shown me that morning. The boundaries were identical, but somehow her updated survey had reclassified a public road as private property. My phone rang, unknown number again. Mr. Cole, this is Danny Chase. I do IT work around town. I heard about your situation. Word travels fast. Small town? Look, I was wondering if you'd be interested in some help. I've got experience with digital records, database searches, that kind of thing. Sometimes old documents get misplaced in system transfers. Danny sounded young, maybe late 20s, the kind of tech-savvy guy who could find a needle in a digital haystack. What's it cost? First consultation's free. After that, we'll see what we find. I gave him my address and told him to come by after lunch. If Victoria Kingsley wanted to play games with paperwork, I'd see what happened when someone who understood computers joined the party. The county clerk's office was a fortress of bureaucracy, housed in a building that predated air conditioning. Mrs. Henderson, no relation to my neighbor, had worked there for 30 years and knew where every document was buried. William Cole, she said when I approached her window. Haven't seen you since your father passed. How you holding up? Been better. I need to see some records from 1962, Maple Creek Lane development. She disappeared into the back room, returning with a thin file that looked nothing like the thick folder Victoria had shown me. Here's what we've got. Not much, I'm afraid. Some of these older records were transferred to digital storage, and the originals were disposed of. Disposed of. The word hit like a punch to the gut. When? Oh, maybe 6 months ago. Part of the modernization initiative. Makes everything more efficient, they said. 6 months ago. Right around the time Victoria Kingsley had started her community improvement campaign. Convenient timing. I flipped through the file. Bare bones documentation. Just enough to prove the road existed, but none of the detailed right-of-way information from Dad's letter. The original plat map was there, but it looked different somehow. Cleaner. As if it had been recently redrawn. Mrs. Henderson, do you remember who requested access to these files recently? She glanced around, then leaned closer to the window. Officially, I can't discuss access logs. Unofficially, your homeowners association president has been very interested in historical boundary documentation. The pieces were starting to fit together, and I didn't like the picture they made. Victoria hadn't just decided to improve the neighborhood. She'd been planning this for months, researching property records, identifying vulnerabilities, probably consulting with lawyers about what she could get away with. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed all the evidence was in the county files. Danny Chase looked exactly like Central Casting, would order for small-town computer guy, skinny, beard, flannel shirt, and the kind of intense focus that came from spending too much time staring at screens. He arrived precisely at 1 o'clock, laptop bag slung over his shoulder. "Show me what you've got," he said, settling at my kitchen table. I spread out Dad's documents while Danny powered up a laptop that probably cost more than my truck. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he accessed databases I didn't know existed. "Interesting," he muttered after 20 minutes. "Your public records show one version of the property boundaries, but the State Highway Department database shows something completely different. According to them, Maple Creek Lane has maintained public right-of-way status continuously since 1962. Can you print that?" Already done. Papers emerged from a portable printer he'd produced from his bag. But here's where it gets really interesting. Someone's been very busy in the county database lately. His screen filled with technical details that meant nothing to me, but Danny's expression said everything. "Your friend Victoria has been logging into the system regularly for the past year, making what the system calls data corrections and updates, cleaning up old records to match modern standards." "You mean changing them?" "I mean making them disappear and replacing them with new versions that support her position." Danny sat back, shaking his head. "It's not technically illegal if you have proper authorization. And as a registered surveyor with the county, which she apparently is, she has that authorization. Victoria Kingsley was a surveyor, just like my father had been. But instead of using her skills to resolve boundary disputes, she was using them to create new ones." "Can you prove the original records were altered?" Danny's grin was sharp as a blade. "Digital forensics isn't my day job, but it's my hobby. Everything leaves traces if you know where to look. Give me a week and I'll have timestamps, login records, and a complete audit trail of every change she made." As he packed up his equipment, I walked him to the door. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained gray and threatening. Down the street, I could see the concrete blocks still squatting across Maple Creek Lane like malignant tumors. "One more thing," Danny said as he reached his car. "You might want to check with the other property owners on your street. I doubt you're the only one being squeezed." I watched him drive away, feeling something I hadn't felt since this whole mess started. Not quite hope, but close. For the first time, I had ammunition instead of just anger. But as I turned to go back inside, I noticed a white sedan parked at the end of my driveway. Victoria Kingsley sat behind the wheel, talking on her phone. When she saw me looking, she smiled and gave a little wave. Then she drove away, leaving me with the uncomfortable feeling that the game had just changed again. The library on 3rd Street had been my refuge as a kid, back when Mrs. Grace ran the place with an iron fist and infinite patience. 30 years later, she was still there, silver-haired and sharp-eyed behind wire-rimmed glasses that probably predated the internet. "William Cole," she said as I approached her desk. "I heard about your troubles with the road." News traveled faster than gossip in a town this size, and librarians heard everything first. "What else have you heard?" She glanced around the nearly empty reading room, then leaned forward conspiratorially. "Victoria Kingsley's been spending a lot of time here lately. Research," she said. "Historical property records, old newspaper archives, municipal ordinances from the 60s. Mrs. Grace led me to a corner table stacked with bound newspaper volumes and manila folders. She was particularly interested in anything about your father's surveying work. Said she was writing a local history book." A local history book. Right. More likely she was looking for ammunition to support her land grab. But if Victoria had been researching here, maybe she'd missed something important. "These are the archives she requested," Mrs. Grace said, patting the stack. "But, funny thing, she never looked at the county commissioner meeting minutes from 1962, said they weren't relevant to her project." She pulled a thin volume from the bottom of the stack. "Might be worth a look, though. Your father attended those meetings regularly." I flipped through pages of bureaucratic minutes until I found what Mrs. Grace was talking about. June 15th, 1962. Agenda Item 7. Public right-of-way designation for Maple Creek Lane development. The discussion was brief but clear. County Commissioner Harrison moved to designate the access road as permanent public right-of-way, funded by county maintenance with perpetual access guaranteed to all current and future residents. Motion seconded by Commissioner Wells. Passed unanimously. But it was the handwritten note in the margin that made my pulse quicken. In Dad's careful script, ensured permanent access per state highway depth requirements. Future development cannot restrict existing rights. Mrs. Grace watched me read, her expression knowing. Your father was thorough about protecting people's access to their homes. He'd seen too many situations where developers tried to strand existing residents after the fact. I photocopied everything, feeling pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. Victoria wasn't just trying to squeeze money out of me. She was systematically erasing the legal foundation that protected my right to reach my own property. The coffee shop on Main Street was the kind of place where retired guys gathered every morning to solve the world's problems over burnt coffee and day-old donuts. I figured if anyone had insights about local politics and property disputes, it would be the morning regulars. I was right. Victoria Kingsley's been busy, said Frank Morrison, a retired county employee who'd worked in the assessor's office for 20 years. She's been filing paperwork all over town. Boundary disputes, easement challenges, zoning variance requests. All legitimate, added Pete Sellers, who'd run the local hardware store until his son took over. But aggressive, real aggressive, like she's trying to redesign the whole area from scratch. They painted a picture of systematic pressure campaign. Victoria had been identifying properties with ambiguous access rights, then using her surveyor credentials to challenge existing arrangements. Most people, faced with expensive legal battles, simply paid her fees and joined the association. Smart business model, Frank admitted grudgingly. Create the problem, then sell the solution. What about the other residents on Maple Creek Lane? I asked. Pete and Frank exchanged glances. Haven't you heard? The Hendersons sold last month. The Yamadas put their place on the market 2 weeks ago. You're the only holdout left. The only holdout. Which explained why Victoria was escalating the pressure. If she could force me out or force me to pay, she'd have complete control of the entire street. Her private community would be exactly that. Completely private. My phone buzzed with a text from Danny. Found something big. Meet me at Riverside Park at 6 p.m. Come alone. The afternoon dragged by with the weight of waiting. I tried to focus on normal activities. Laundry, grocery shopping, fixing a leaky faucet. But my mind kept circling back to Victoria's game plan. How long had she been orchestrating this? How many other people had she pushed out of their homes? Riverside Park sat empty except for Danny's car parked near the boat launch. He was waiting by a picnic table, laptop open, papers spread across the weathered wood. The sun was setting through the trees, casting long shadows across the grass. You need to see this, he said without preamble, spinning the laptop toward me. I've been digging deeper into the database modifications. Victoria didn't just alter your records. She's been systematically changing property documentation across the entire county. The screen showed a timeline of database access, login records, and file modifications going back 18 months. Hundreds of entries, all traced to Victoria's surveyor credentials. She's been very careful, Danny continued, never changing more than 1 or 2 records per week, always within her authority as a licensed surveyor. But look at the pattern. He pulled up a map overlay showing properties across 3 townships. Red dots marked locations where Victoria had made corrections to historical records. The dots formed clusters around prime real estate areas, lakefront properties, scenic rural roads, land suitable for upscale development. She's not just running a homeowners association, I realized. She's running a real estate acquisition scheme. Exactly. Create access problems, force people to sell cheap, then swoop in with development deals. I found incorporation papers for something called Sunset Ridge Development Corporation. Guess who's the principal investor? The pieces were falling into place, but they painted a picture bigger and more calculated than I'd imagined. Victoria wasn't just a demanding neighbor with control issues. She was a predator using her professional credentials to systematically strip people of their property rights. Can we prove it? Danny's expression turned grim. That's the problem. Everything she's done is technically legal. She has authorization to make database corrections. She's following proper procedures for filing boundary disputes. On paper, She's just a very thorough surveyor, cleaning up historical inconsistencies. But you found something. I found everything. Complete audit trail, backup records, even some deleted files I was able to recover. The question is what we do with it. As we talked, a white sedan pulled into the parking lot. Victoria Kingsley climbed out, wearing a business suit and carrying a briefcase. She walked directly toward our table, as if she owned the entire park. "Gentlemen," she said pleasantly, "beautiful evening for a meeting." Danny's face went pale. He started closing files on his laptop, but Victoria held up her hand. "No need to be secretive, Mr. Chase. I know exactly what you've been researching." She set her briefcase on the table with a soft thud. "The question is whether you understand the legal implications of unauthorized access to confidential county databases." Danny's hands froze over his keyboard. Everything I accessed was public record. Not quite everything. Victoria opened her briefcase and pulled out official-looking documents. Security logs show multiple intrusions into restricted administrative systems, database modifications, theft of proprietary surveying data, very serious charges. She slid a business card across the table to Danny. "My attorney's information. You'll want to call him first thing Monday morning. I'm sure we can work out some arrangement." Danny grabbed his laptop and stood up abruptly. "I need to go." "Danny, wait." But he was already walking away, leaving me alone at the table with Victoria and the growing realization that I'd just lost my only technical advantage. Victoria sat down across from me, smoothing her skirt with practiced precision. "William, I hope you're starting to understand the situation. I have resources you don't, connections you don't, legal expertise you can't afford to challenge." The sun disappeared behind the tree line, leaving us in purple twilight. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower started up, the sound of suburban normalcy continuing while my world tilted off its axis. "What do you want?" "I want you to accept reality. Your property is landlocked without association access. Your legal position is weak. Your financial resources are limited." She closed her briefcase with a decisive snap. "I'm offering you a way out that preserves your dignity. By paying you $8,000 for rights I already own. By joining a community that will protect and enhance your property value for years to come." Victoria stood, straightening her jacket. "The offer expires Monday, William. After that, things get more complicated." She walked back to her sedan, leaving me sitting alone in the gathering darkness. The lawnmower had stopped, replaced by the evening chorus of crickets and tree frogs. Normal sounds of a normal evening in a normal neighborhood. Except nothing about this was normal anymore. And I was starting to understand that Victoria Kingsley had been playing a much longer game than I'd realized. Monday morning arrived with the sound of heavy machinery. I looked out my bedroom window to see a crew installing additional concrete barriers along Maple Creek Lane, effectively turning my street into a fortress. Victoria wasn't just maintaining the blockade, she was making it permanent. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Danny Chase, all from Saturday night, all unanswered. I'd been avoiding him since the park confrontation, partly from embarrassment and partly because I didn't want to drag him deeper into Victoria's crosshairs. But when I finally called him back, his voice carried a different energy entirely. "William, you need to get over here, now. I found something that changes everything." Danny lived in a converted garage behind his mother's house, walls lined with computer equipment and the kind of organized chaos that suggested genius at work. He was pacing when I arrived, practically vibrating with excitement. "I've been up all weekend," he said, gesturing to multiple monitors displaying code and database records. Victoria's threat got me thinking, if she's monitoring database access so carefully, what else is she monitoring? He pulled up a screen filled with network traffic logs. I started tracing her digital footprint backwards, email records, file transfers, communication patterns, and I found this. The screen showed email exchanges between Victoria and someone named Richard Steinberg, dating back 2 years. The subject lines alone told a story. Phase 2, implementation. Property acquisition timeline, municipal relations update. Richard Steinberg runs a development company out of the state capital, Danny explained. High-end resort properties, luxury residential communities, the kind of projects that require buying up large tracts of rural land. I scanned the email previews Danny had managed to access, references to target properties, resistance mitigation, and regulatory compliance strategies. This wasn't homeowners association business. This was corporate land acquisition. She's been feeding him intelligence on vulnerable properties across 3 counties, Danny continued. Property owners with access disputes, unclear title issues, financial problems. His company swoops in with low-ball offers, then develops the land for wealthy buyers from the city. How does that connect to my situation? Danny pulled up a map overlay showing planned development zones. My property sat dead center in an area marked Phase 3, Lakefront Resort Community. The entire Maple Creek Lane area was designated for luxury vacation homes with private marina access. Your house isn't the problem, William. Your house is sitting on prime lakefront development land worth about $2 million to the right buyer. The room seemed to tilt around me. $2 million for land my father had bought for $8,000 in 1975. Land I'd been treating like a simple homestead when it was actually a gold mine. But there's more, Danny said grimly. Look at this. He showed me email records from the past month, internal communications between Victoria and Steinberg's company. They were getting impatient. Phase 3 was supposed to begin this fall, but my property was holding up the entire project. They've already bought out your neighbors, Danny explained. The Hendersons, the Yamadas, 2 other families whose names you probably don't know. Everyone except you. And without your parcel, they can't get the unified development permits they need. I sank into a folding chair, trying to process the implications. So, the homeowners association thing is just cover? Brilliant cover. Who questions a neighborhood improvement initiative? She gets to use her surveyor credentials, file legitimate paperwork, pressure people legally. And when someone finally sells, Steinberg's company happens to make a generous cash offer within days. Danny pulled up financial records showing the pattern. Property owner faces access crisis. Victoria offers expensive association membership as only solution. Owner either pays thousands to join or sells their property at below market value. Steinberg's company immediately purchases from the new owner at full market value. It's not illegal, Danny admitted, but it's systematic fraud. She's using public resources and professional credentials to manipulate property values for private gain. I thought about Victoria's confidence, her careful documentation, her legal threats against Danny. She'd been playing this game for 2 years, perfecting her methods across dozens of properties. By now, she probably felt untouchable. The question is what we do about it, Danny said. Because after this weekend, I'm pretty sure my database access is about to be revoked permanently. We spent the next hour going through options, report it to the state surveyor licensing board, but Victoria's methods were technically within professional guidelines. Report it to the county commissioners, but she'd been careful to follow all proper procedures. Report it to law enforcement, but no specific laws had been broken. We need to expose the connection between her and Steinberg, I said finally. Show people this isn't about community improvement. It's about development profit. Danny nodded. But we need proof that holds up to scrutiny. These email records I accessed, let's just say they wouldn't be admissible in court. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Unknown number, but I was getting used to those by now. Mr. Cole, this is Richard Steinberg. I believe we need to talk. The voice was smooth, professional, with the kind of confidence that came from closing deals worth millions. I understand you're having some difficulties with property access. You could say that. I'd like to make you an offer. Cash purchase, full asking price, close within 30 days. No inspections, no contingencies. I think you'll find the terms very attractive. He named a figure that made my vision blur. $600,000. More money than I'd see in a lifetime of factory work. Enough to buy a house anywhere I wanted, with plenty left over for retirement. That's generous, I managed. I believe in fair dealing, Mr. Cole. Your property has sentimental value that goes beyond market appraisal. I want to respect that. But something in his tone suggested this wasn't entirely about respect. What if I'm not interested in selling? A pause. Well, that would be unfortunate. Property disputes can drag on for years. Legal costs accumulate. Access problems persist. Another pause. But I'm confident we can find mutually beneficial solution. He gave me 48 hours to consider the offer, then hung up before I could respond. Danny had been listening to my side of the conversation, and his expression was grim. They're accelerating the timeline. Something spooked them. Maybe your weekend hacking session? Maybe, or maybe they have other deadlines we don't know about. Danny started shutting down his computers. William, you need to understand something. These people have resources I can't match. Legal teams, political connections, financial leverage. If they want your property badly enough... He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung in the air. This wasn't just about my right to drive down a public road anymore. This was about whether a small-town factory worker could stand up to a multi-million-dollar development scheme. I left Danny's garage feeling more isolated than when I'd arrived. The evidence we'd gathered painted a clear picture of systematic manipulation, but it also showed how carefully Victoria and her partner had insulated themselves from legal consequences. As I drove the long way home, 43 minutes instead of 3, I passed a sign I'd never noticed before. Future site of Sunset Ridge Luxury Resort Community, with an artist's rendering of million-dollar vacation homes overlooking the lake. My lake, my neighborhood, my community being sold out from under me one property at a time. But what Victoria and her development partner didn't understand was that some things aren't for sale, no matter how much money you throw around. And some people get more stubborn the harder you push. The concrete blocks still squatted across Maple Creek Lane like malignant tombstones. But now I understood what they really represented. Not just an access dispute, but a battle for the soul of rural America. A battle I was about to take very personally. Tuesday evening, I sat in my truck outside the county courthouse, watching people stream in for the monthly commissioners' meeting. Most looked like regular folks. Farmers, retirees, small business owners dealing with zoning issues and tax assessments. But scattered through the crowd, I spotted faces I recognized from Victoria's association meetings. This wasn't coincidence. They were here for something specific. I'd spent 2 days thinking about Steinberg's offer, turning it over like a stone in my pocket. $600,000 to walk away from everything my father had built, everything I'd called home for 30 years. Part of me wondered if that wasn't the smart play. But then I'd remember Dad's voice from 20 years ago. Son, sometimes you have to decide what you're going to be remembered for, the fights you won or the ones you walked away from. Inside the courthouse, fluorescent lights buzzed over folding chairs arranged in neat rows. The commissioners sat behind a raised desk that made them look like judges presiding over small-town justice. Commissioner Harrison, the same one who'd voted for permanent public access in 1962, was still there, silver-haired and sharp-eyed. I took a seat in the back, close enough to hear, but far enough to avoid attention. The first hour was routine business: road maintenance budgets, livestock ordinances, permit applications. But then Harrison called Agenda Item 12, Petition for Road Reclassification, Maple Creek Lane. Victoria Kingsley rose from the front row like she owned the place. Behind her, a man in an expensive suit who could only be Richard Steinberg sat with a briefcase thick enough to choke a horse. Commissioners, Victoria began, the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association requests reclassification of Maple Creek Lane from public right-of-way to private community access. We've prepared extensive documentation showing historical boundary inconsistencies and maintenance burden issues. She distributed packets to each commissioner, thick with maps, surveys, and legal opinions. Professional presentation, corporate backing, the kind of steamroller approach that usually got results in small-town politics. Commissioner Harrison flipped through the documents, frowning. Mrs. Kingsley, these records show the road was designated permanent public access in 1962. That designation can't be simply reversed without compelling justification. With respect, Commissioner, our research shows significant documentation errors in the original survey work. Victoria's voice carried the confidence of someone who'd never been challenged. Modern surveying technology reveals boundary discrepancies that create liability issues for the county. Steinberg leaned forward. Commissioners, my company specializes in resolving these kinds of historical property disputes. We're prepared to assume full responsibility for road maintenance and access management, relieving taxpayer burden while ensuring appropriate community standards. The room buzzed with murmurs. This was political theater, carefully orchestrated to make the commissioners feel like they were solving problems rather than creating them. Take a maintenance headache off county books, transfer it to a private entity with deep pockets, everybody wins, except for the people who live there. Commissioner Wells, a younger man I didn't recognize, raised his hand. Are there any affected property owners present who'd like to comment? This was my moment. I stood up, feeling every eye in the room turn toward me. William Cole, 47 Sunset Ridge Circle. I've lived on Maple Creek Lane for 20 years, and my family's been connected to this property since 1962. Victoria's head snapped around, her expression shifting from confident to annoyed. Behind her, Steinberg whispered something to a colleague. Commissioner Harrison, I continued, you might remember my father, Robert Cole. He did the original survey work for the Maple Creek development. Harrison's expression brightened with recognition. Bobby Cole's boy. He was a good man, thorough surveyor. What's your concern about this petition? I walked forward, pulling Dad's original documentation from my jacket pocket. My concern is that Mrs. Kingsley's petition is based on falsified records. The original public access designation was deliberate and legally binding. The room went dead silent. Victoria half rose from her seat, then caught herself. Commissioner, Mr. Cole is obviously emotional about changes to his neighborhood, but I'm emotional about fraud, I cut her off. Mrs. Kingsley has been systematically altering county property records to support private development interests. I have documentation proving the original boundaries and access rights. I handed Dad's papers to Commissioner Harrison, watching his expression change as he read. The 1962 letter from the State Highway Department was still crisp and clear after 60 years. Dad's careful notations still legible in the margins. These appear to contradict the survey information in your petition, Mrs. Kingsley, Harrison said slowly. Victoria's composure cracked slightly. Commissioner, Mr. Cole's documents are outdated and potentially inaccurate. Our modern survey techniques show boundary lines that conveniently support your development partner's acquisition plans, I interrupted. Richard Steinberg's company has been systematically buying up properties along Maple Creek Lane, using access disputes manufactured by Mrs. Kingsley to force below-market sales. The room erupted in whispers. Steinberg stood abruptly, his polished demeanor slipping. Commissioner, these are serious accusations without foundation. Foundation like email records documenting your 2-year collaboration with Mrs. Kingsley. I pulled out printed copies of the communications Danny had recovered. Foundation like financial records showing synchronized property purchases following manufactured access crises. Harrison held up his hand for silence. Mr. Cole, are you alleging that this petition is part of a coordinated effort to manipulate property values for development purposes? I'm alleging that Mrs. Kingsley has abused her surveyor credentials to alter public records, creating artificial property disputes that benefit her development partner's acquisition strategy. I looked directly at Victoria, who was furiously whispering with Steinberg, and I'm alleging that tonight's petition is the culmination of a scheme to steal public access rights for private profit. The commissioners huddled in whispered conference while the audience buzzed with speculation. Victoria sat rigidly in her chair, the confidence drained from her posture. Steinberg was already packing his briefcase, clearly calculating whether this exposure was worth the fight. Commissioner Harrison called for order. In light of conflicting documentation and serious allegations regarding the petition's foundation, this matter will be tabled pending independent investigation. Mrs. Kingsley, you'll receive notice of procedures for responding to Mr. Cole's concerns. Victoria's face went white. Steinberg was already heading for the exit, leaving her to face the music alone. The carefully orchestrated presentation had collapsed into public scandal in less than 30 minutes. As the meeting adjourned, people crowded around me with questions and comments, some angry about property manipulation, others curious about the development plans they'd never heard about. The word was spreading, and it wasn't going to stop. Victoria approached as I gathered Dad's papers. This isn't over, William. You have no idea the forces you're dealing with. Neither did you, I replied. You thought you were pressuring some factory worker who'd roll over for authority, but you picked a fight with Bobby Cole's son, and he raised me to finish what I start. She walked away without another word, leaving me standing in the courthouse lobby with a group of neighbors I barely knew, but who suddenly felt like allies. For the first time since this whole mess started, I wasn't facing Victoria Kingsley's machine alone. But as I drove home the long way, still blocked from my own street, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning. Because people like Victoria and Steinberg didn't invest 2 years and millions of dollars just to walk away from public embarrassment. They regrouped, adapted, and came back harder. Thursday morning brought the sound I'd been waiting 6 weeks to hear. Heavy equipment, but this time it was moving in the right direction. Through my bedroom window, I watched a county road crew loading the concrete blocks onto flatbed trucks, clearing Maple Creek Lane for the first time since this nightmare began. Commissioner Harrison had called personally the night before. William, the state surveyor licensing board, is launching a formal investigation into Mrs. Kingsley's record modifications. The county attorney's office is reviewing potential fraud charges, and effective immediately, we're restoring public access to Maple Creek Lane. But it was what he didn't say that mattered most. Richard Steinberg's development company had quietly withdrawn their permits for the luxury resort project. Without unified property control, their grand vision of lakefront vacation homes had evaporated overnight. I dressed slowly, savoring the moment. Dad's old army dog tag caught the morning light as I slipped it over my head. Today felt like the kind of day he would have appreciated, justice served with a side of poetic comeuppance. The first truck rumbled past my driveway at 8 a.m. sharp. 3 minutes to reach the factory instead of 43. $8 saved in gas. 2 hours of my life returned. But more than that, proof that sometimes the little guy really can win against corporate machinery. Mrs. Grace was waiting by her mailbox when I drove past the library, coffee cup in hand, and a satisfied smile on her face. She raised the cup in a small salute as I passed. Word traveled fast in a town this size, and apparently the news was good. Danny Chase was less celebratory when I stopped by his garage workshop. We won this round, he admitted, fingers flying over his keyboard. But Steinberg's company is still out there. They'll find another target, another Victoria Kingsley to front their operation. Maybe, but they won't find another Bobby Cole's son to mess with. Danny grinned at that, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him since this whole mess started. Fair enough. Oh, and William? That database access Victoria threatened to revoke? Turns out when someone's under investigation for record falsification, their system privileges get suspended automatically. He pulled up screens showing restored property records, original boundary designations, and public access confirmations. Everything's back to the way it should be, the way your father documented it 60 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. Victoria's expertise in digital record manipulation had ultimately become the evidence of her own fraud. Every alteration she'd made left electronic fingerprints that led back to her coordinated scheme with Steinberg. I spent the afternoon doing something I hadn't done in weeks, working in my yard without looking over my shoulder for white sedans or unexpected visitors. The satisfaction of normal activities felt almost foreign after so much conflict and uncertainty. Around sunset, I was replacing the numbers on my mailbox when a familiar car pulled into the driveway. Victoria Kingsley climbed out, but she looked nothing like the polished professional who'd confronted me in her pristine living room. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her clothes were casual, and her expression carried something I'd never seen before: genuine defeat. "William," she said quietly, "I wanted to apologize." I set down my screwdriver and studied her face. No calculation behind her eyes, no strategic positioning, just exhaustion and something that might have been regret. For which part? The fraud, the manipulation, or trying to steal my home? All of it. She leaned against her car, suddenly looking older than her years. It started as legitimate surveying work, cleaning up old records, resolving boundary disputes. But Richard's company offered consulting fees that were substantial, and the work kept expanding into systematic property theft, into what felt like community improvement at the time. Victoria shook her head. I convinced myself we were helping, increasing property values, bringing investment to rural areas. It's easy to rationalize almost anything when the checks keep getting bigger. I could have stayed angry. Part of me wanted to. This woman had threatened my home, manipulated my neighbors, and nearly succeeded in stealing land my family had owned for decades. But standing there in the evening light, she looked more like a cautionary tale than a villain. "What happens now?" I asked. "I'm surrendering my surveyor license tomorrow. Richard's company is facing federal investigation for mail fraud. The other property owners we pressured are filing a class action lawsuit." She managed a bitter smile. Turns out systematic fraud has consequences, even when you're careful about the paperwork. Victoria climbed back into her car, then rolled down the window. For what it's worth, your father would have been proud. He always said the best surveyors protect people's connection to their land. I forgot that somewhere along the way. I watched her drive away, taillights disappearing around the bend in Maple Creek Lane, the road my father had mapped, that I'd defended, that would carry me to work tomorrow morning in 3 minutes instead of 43. As darkness settled over the neighborhood, I walked down to where the concrete blocks had squatted for 6 weeks. Fresh asphalt marked where they'd sat, but the scars would fade with weather and time. What wouldn't fade was the lesson this whole experience had taught me about the value of persistence, documentation, and refusing to back down when you know you're right. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Saw the news about your road situation. Congratulations on the victory. A friend. I looked around the empty street, suddenly aware that word of our battle had spread beyond county lines. Somewhere out there, other Richard Steinbergs and Victoria Kingsleys were probably reading news coverage and adjusting their strategies. The fight for small-town America never really ended. It just moved to new battlefields. But tonight, at least, Maple Creek Lane belonged to the people who lived here. Dad's dog tag felt warm against my chest as I walked back toward my house, following the route he'd surveyed 60 years ago, the route I'd drive tomorrow and every day after that. Because some things are worth fighting for. Some battles are worth winning, and sometimes if you're stubborn enough and lucky enough and careful enough with your documentation, David really can beat Goliath. Even when Goliath has corporate backing and professional credentials and 2 years of careful planning. Especially then. The porch light glowed yellow against the darkness as I reached my front door, welcoming me home the way it had for 20 years, the way it would for 20 more, now that the road that connected me to the world was finally, permanently, indisputably mine again. Just like Dad always said it should be.